Hello, everyone. My name is Xiye. I'm a 20-year-old climate justice activist. I am the co-founder of Re-Earth Initiative, which is an international youth-led organization that focuses on highlighting the intersectionality of the climate crisis. And I am also an organizer for the Fridays for Future Climate Strikes.
Hi, my name is Farwiza. I work in a landscape called the Loiser ecosystem in Sumatra. So the work that we do is to protect, conserve, and restore the forest in the Loiser ecosystem. This landscape is the last place on Earth where the critically endangered rhino, tiger, elephant, and orangutan still roam together in the wild. I started as a marine biologist, ecologist. I wanted to protect this forest because I love this wildlife. But over the years, I learned that more than anything, people needs this forest because this forest gives people life and livelihood. One thing that worries me the most is actually apathy. It's actually when people don't care, when people think they can get away with polluting the environment and not having to face the consequences.
What worries me the most about our current state, not only in where the climate crisis is at, but also our climate solutions are at, is that we're not including frontline communities in solutions. Even if we're talking about how our cities are going to be renewable and how we're on that transition to green energy, we still have to remember that if we have an unequal system, we're going to have unequal consequences and unequal impacts to people. And so when we are drafting all of our environmental legislation, it has to be done in a way in which it protects frontline communities. So when we are imagining a better world, which is what climate solutions are all about, we have to understand that if we don't put people who have been protecting Mother Earth at the forefront and people who have suffered the worst impacts, we are going to keep perpetuating all of these issues. I know the conversation has advanced so much on climate solutions, climate legislation, adaptation, and even loss and damage. But we cannot keep going in this way if we don't include the people who have been historically affected. Well, I was raised in an indigenous community. It's called the Otomi Toltec community in the highlands of central Mexico. And my family raised me with very clear principles on how to look at the world and how to look at our relationship with the world. Those principles include reciprocity. If you take, you must give back, include intergenerational cooperation. So we have youth and elder circles where youth learn about the wisdom of elders. It also includes the 7-generation principle, which says we have to look at the wisdom of the past 7 generations to ensure the stability of the future 7 generations. And I try to bring those to the climate movement and the world as a whole. And I also think of my family's resilience and how much they have fought for our territories to be protected, for our territories to be free of exploitation, extraction, and development in a way that is not, conscious development. So that's what keeps me going. The knowledge that my family has so much history and wisdom and that I'm protecting future generations. And the through line of it all is joy, the preservation of joy, because the climate crisis is violent, displacement is violence, and wildfires, like all of those things are violence, are different types of violence. So, like everything that feeds me is that fight for joy, but also embodying that joy and showing people that the future that we're fighting for has to come from a place of love, because love is always going to counter any bad actor, any bad policy. So that's what keeps me going. Community, principles, and just the knowledge and the knowing that we're going to have a better world for our children.
I first come into the conservation world also out of love. I went snorkeling out at the beach and I see coral reef and I fell in love with the ocean. I was like, this is too gorgeous. Somehow I want to grow up and do this for the rest of my life, somehow live underwater. But then at the same time, sometimes with your first love, you got heartbroken as well. When I did become a marine biologist, I come back to that very same place to see the coral reef completely trashed because of climate change, because of sea temperature rise. And it breaks my heart because I felt powerless. I felt like there's nothing I can do. So then at that time, I thought maybe I'll try to protect forests. It took me another decade of learning from process of learning marine biology into learning ecology to learn about people and the wisdom of the indigenous communities. What inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing is being back in the forest. Every time I'm back in the forest, every time I'm interacting with the rangers, every time I'm back with the community and swimming in that river, it refreshes me and it reminded me that this is so important. Forest and people need each other. Forest and people could not be seen as a separate ecosystem. And this is why we have to keep going. One doesn't come into conservation being a pessimistic. Of course, I'm one of those that see glass half full, but also I'm a realist. We have a lot of work that we need to do if we are to survive intact. There is climate change and so many other problems, and COVID have reiterate and show us the cracks in our society, the cracks where injustice are most apparent. Those that are poorer communities, marginalized communities felt the effect greater than anyone else. And this show us that we will not have a future without fixing our social structure, without working on our social justice. So I do have hope, but I'm also acknowledging that we have so much work that we need to do to get there. But again, we could get there together.
I know that humanity will survive. The question is who survives and who do we survive with? And by that I mean, are we willing to lose our biodiversity? Are we willing to lose nature? Are we willing to lose that happiness that Farwiza is talking about? The happiness of interacting with our oceans, interacting with our rainforests, interacting with everything that also fills me with inspiration and love. And we have to make that choice. Right now, we are at that crossroads, whether we decide if we survive in a gray world or if we survive in a thriving, regenerative, beautiful world. And that is what a lot of my work is about showing people what that new imagined future can look like. And I am so sure that if you inspire enough people to be able to be creative and imaginative, we can walk that path towards building a world that works for everyone. And it's small steps, but history has shown us that movements work in that way. You see small incremental changes at first, and then it cascades into everything happening mostly at once. And I think that's something that the youth movement has achieved in such a short period of time. There's people who have been fighting for things like conservation rights and protected areas for decades. But now we are seeing it as a mainstream topic. And that is the momentum that we have to take advantage of. Well, this conversation is huge in, I think, any movement, but especially the environmental justice movement, because you can put a lot of blame on individuals. And here is where it's very important to notice how there's campaigns by companies to actually put the blame on individuals to shift it away from companies. So Coca-Cola has told us to recycle for years. ExxonMobil, BP, they're telling us to look at our carbon footprint rather than question how much oil they've spilled. And so that's something that we have to be wary of when we think of our individual actions. But at the same time, every individual that exists on this planet is subscribed to a story. And it's a story that, governments, people in power have been telling us. And we have to question that story and rewrite that story. And that story has to be one where it goes from individualism to cooperation, from competition to collaboration. And that is why individuals' engagement is pivotal, because no change is going to happen unless it's cultural. And so when people ask me what to do and how to support my work, for example, or Farwiza's work, I think they want to hear, don't eat as much meat or bring your own bag to the store. But what I want people to do is to become activists themselves and to see how they can have a stake in changing the world, because we cannot just have people following certain things. We have to have people imagining their own future and seeing how they have a stake in it. And no change has ever happened in the world of movements without passionate, committed people who cannot see their movement failing. And those are the type of people we need. We need people who are motivated and driven. And I know there's so much potential around the world for that.
I was exactly going to say what Xiye was saying. I mean, there's a lot of expectations put on individuals to recycle, to reduce the carbon footprint, to eat less meat, which is great on one hand, because it's collective. It's billions and billions of us doing things together, and it lead us to the current situation. I hope the small things that individuals do lead to bigger changes, but not leading us into creating guilt activism against one another. When we see our friends eating meat, we looked at them with sneering look and said, why are you still eating meat? When we see someone holding a plastic bag, there's so many other choices that we could do instead of going the path of guilt activism on the individual level. First of all, the first thing that we need to acknowledge is we need more seat at the table for the young people, for young activists. It's not enough to involve youth and young people and young activists on the sidelines as tokens. I think we really need to change our decision-making systems. So when you look around you, when you are at certain table, whatever table that is, and you see there's no seat for a young table, stand up and make that seat available for someone else. And the reason why I say this is so many involvement of young people has been tokenistic, has been on the surface. But what we really need is for youth to take over the decision making, because clearly they are the one that will be dealing with the consequences in the future.
Well, the way that I see it is that never before have we had this much information on what the right thing to do is. And also never before have youth around the world been so united for one purpose, which is a livable, sustainable, fair, and just future. And so when you look at where, like, the pathway to get there, we need people who have that imagination and haven't been tainted with these false ideas of, everlasting, ever-growing profit. We need people who don't measure our worth or success in GDP. We measure our success in how many hearts we have touched, and how much we're learning and how much we can share. And that's why a young person's voice is important, because we see through the greenwashing, we see through the false promises, and you need a challenger in every room. And that concept should not only be implemented and applied in the corporate world, but in government, in institutions. I think that the generations of today have maybe already made all their wealth that they needed to make, or they have seen how that is not really fulfilling. And that's not the type of world that we want. And so what I will say is you need somebody to challenge you, and you need to maybe be making decisions knowing that there's a young person next to you looking and judging what you're doing, but not only judging, but more inspiring what you're doing. And I think that you can support young leaders by just opening spaces for us, highlighting our voices, highlighting our ideas, showing the world that we need this type of brains and imagination and hearts to be in the leading positions. Because if not, we're not gonna get to where we need to be. And I'm not saying only this for myself, but for every young person around the world that feels like maybe they cannot call themselves an activist or a change maker because it's too dangerous, or they cannot study what they want because their parents want them to study business, or, but the truth is that we are entering a new era, and instead of ignoring it, we have to embrace it. So the young generation and, are going to be instrumental in that. And I commit to, when I'm older, open spaces for young people at all times. And I think everybody should commit to that now.